Today's first reading came from the letter to the Ephesians. There's a very similar, almost the same message in St. Paul's letter to the Colossians in chapter 3. And we hear that reading every year on what's called Holy Family Sunday, the first Sunday immediately after Christmas. And we hear the phrase from that reading, "Children, obey your parents in everything, for this is pleasing to the Lord." And when I was your age, the children's version of the lectionary used to go on to say, "Fathers, do not nag your children." So we had an annual ritual in my family. After Mass, my baby sister and my two younger brothers and I would be in the car, and my father would always say, "And what did you hear in the reading today at Mass?" Obviously expecting us to say, "Children, obey your parents." And in unison, we would all say, "Fathers, do not nag your children." So I have a fond recollection of this reading. Now, there is some dispute as to whether St. Paul actually wrote this letter to the Ephesians, which doesn't really matter. It clearly was written by someone very close to him, and it reflects his thinking. It's clearly taken verbatim from the letter to Colossians. But St. Paul made it very emphatically clear, as did Jesus and as did God when he gave us this commandment: honor your father and your mother. Now, the reading goes on in this instance to talk about slaves and saying that slaves and masters should respect each other. It's hard for us in this day and age to imagine a society with slaves. Our world has condemned slavery. And unfortunately, the slavery of the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries in North and South America was a bit of cruel and harsh type of slavery. But back some 2,000 plus years ago in the Roman Empire, slaves were not as exploited as they were in more recent centuries and in this part of the world. In fact, if you ever have been or get the chance to go to Pompeii and you see the amazing ruins, how much, because of volcanic ash, preserved so much of this society that was destroyed in the year 72. And you see in the homes, you see kind of where the family lived and what would have been where the slave lived as part of the household. But without going too far afield into that, the point is that slaves who did all the domestic work, there were actually more slaves than free citizens in Rome in Jesus' time, they did the domestic work, all the labor, and the citizens didn't have to, but they interacted with each other. And the teaching is to be respectful, to be good to them. And as a result, this reading from St. Paul's, this school of his teaching, has been called the Code of Household Conduct. And Paul's idea was this: you have been blessed to learn about Jesus. You have been blessed to know him. Therefore, you are the chosen. So now, go about the world. Go about your business, at home and out in the community, being helpful, being a good example, and not being a disruption. A seminarian I knew once said, "This is a reading that's more about manners than theology." But there is a theological point, and it's this: as disciples of Jesus, we shouldn't ask, what's the least that I can do and still be a good person and still be a faithful disciple? Instead, what Paul is suggesting to us is that we ask, how can I be the best son or daughter, the best mother or father, the best student or teacher, the best boss or employee? Not giving the minimum, but doing the best both for my own well-being and to create a society, a home, a workplace, a classroom, a school of harmony, of peace, of kindness, and of courtesy. And that's the point that Jesus reinforces in the gospel we just heard, where he says, strive to enter through the narrow gate. For example, Jerusalem was a walled city. The wall that existed in Jesus' time is still there. And you can see it. And these big, huge gates that would have been as wide as this whole chapel would be opened for a period early in the afternoon every day. And camels and horses and donkeys loaded with goods and all kinds of people and soldiers on horses would open and go through in and out of the city gates during the period that they were open. But then they'd be closed before nightfall. And if anyone, a shepherd coming out from the fields or a traveler or a visitor, wanted to get into the city at another time, he had to come up to a very narrow gate, just like a door. And it was guarded by soldiers and centurions. So if you were a little bit of a shady character, if you were trying to do something wrong, you could kind of sneak in when the wide gates were open because it wasn't the same level of scrutiny. But when it came to the narrow gate, you had to account for yourself, be identified. Have no secrets, have no shame. And that's Jesus' message. If you're really doing the best, if you can withstand a high level of scrutiny, then you'll make it through that narrow gate. It's wanting to be the best. It's trying to be the best. So if we embrace our relationship with Jesus in a warm and total way and take to heart the teaching that St. Paul seeks to impart on us in today's reading, then we'll pass through the narrow gate without any trouble, and everyone will find us more pleasant and enjoyable to deal with.